What we're going to do here is going to install the front section of the IPP Stage 2 suspension lift kit, which consists of these little pucks that go above between the aluminum bracket here and the body. We got a puck with a little locating pin in the center. Now this pin here is floating in there, and it's meant like that on purpose, and I'll show you in a minute what that's all about. So lifted the car, took the wheels off. All I've done is I've cracked this loose. I cracked loose the airline here. I have not taken it right out, just to get the air out of the bag, make it a little easier to compress the strut. And now we're going to take off the 3 M10 bolts through the top there, and we'll be right back. Okay, so now we're going to install the 3 spacers between the aluminum bracket and the body. I've got one in the back there, kind of positioned. One thing to note: one of the 3 spacers has this little notch out of it, and that's to clear that locating stud on this outer bolt. So we'll put these on here, clock this one here properly, and then we'll bolt it up in a second. Okay, so we've got the spacers positioned on top of the aluminum bracket, and we're going to replace the original 25mm bolts with the new 50mm bolt. And one thing to note: the head size 14mm on the new stainless bolts, as the old ones were 16mm. Also, be sure to use anti-seize on the stainless bolts, because stainless and aluminum don't get along well. But yeah, we'll put it together now. Okay, so we've now got it all bolted in and tightened down. All the pucks are sitting nice and tight against the body there. One thing to note is that this airline was clipped on these 2 clips. Since we've kind of moved the whole strut down about 1 inch, it's advisable to just put it on 1 clip here, just not to stretch the line in any way. Still has lots of play here. Just going to snug up that airline, put the wheel on, and go over to the other side. Now we're going to install the IPP Stage 2 lift kit on the rear of this 2004 Allroad, and it consists of this flange that goes between the strut and the body. And we'll start off by deflating this airbag. So now with the airbag deflated, I've gone ahead and removed these 2 M8 bolts to secure that flange to the top, and we're able to compress this airbag down to get the spacer between there. Unfortunately, we can't bring it down by hand enough, so there's several methods we could use to facilitate installing that spacer between there. You could remove the strut altogether, but that's a bit of too much work. You can remove the 2 inner bolts on the lower control arm here. And the reason I say the inner bolts is because the outer bolts have this eccentric washer for alignment purposes, and if you remove that, you're going to have to mess with your alignment. Not that we aren't going to align the car, but it'll be easier to just remove the inner bolts if required. I have my own method. Since I'm on a hoist here, I'll strap this strut here through the holes with a ratchet strap and then pull it down, and I'll show you that in a minute. Alright, so we've got the strut compressed here and ready to install the spacer, but before we compress the strut, just wanted to kind of point out what we did. So we removed the 2 inner bolts on the lower control arm to facilitate dropping of that whole thing. I've got a ratchet strap here just to pull it down. I also undid the M10 nut that holds the bracket for the level arm sensor here. I also undid the ABS sensor grommet here from a grommet on the subframe, or from a little bracket on the subframe, to allow it all to come down and not pinch anything. The parking brake cable here is a little tight, but nothing crazy, just a little taut. But we're going to clean this up and put it back together. I'll be right back. So now we've installed the spacer here in place, and release the ratchet straps. The control arm and whatnot are still all loose under there, but just to show here, we've got some M8 by 1.25 bolts that are 25mm longer than the stock ones in stainless steel, and these flange bolts will go in here. One thing to note: I removed a couple of locating pins that were on the stock flange here. These little pins, there was one about here and one there, that located the stock steel flange onto the body, and these are just here for, you know, fast assembly on an assembly line where they're doing, you know, a car a minute type of thing. So I didn't want to compromise the strength of this spacer, because those little locating pins are close to the edge, so I did not include those. And as you see, I got all this stuff oozing out here. This car is a California car, but it will spend the rest of its life in the northern climate with salt. So I sprayed a good amount of, undercoating up in there, and we'll bolt it back together and be right back. Okay, so we've now got the spacer installed, got the M8 bolts torqued down. We've put the level sensor bracket back on, and we've put the control arm back in. We're going to leave these control arm bolts front and rear there loose until we got it on the ground and we know what the right height we wanted everything at, and only then will we tighten that up. So don't forget this here. It's going into a plastic fitting. I always use the smallest wrench possible to prevent any breakage. You got a little tiny 10mm wrench, and yeah, so it's deflated now, and we'll continue on to the other side. All right, we've now got the IPP Stage 2 lift kit installed on this allroad. We've got the bags front and rear completely deflated, and this illustrates that with that 1-inch lift on the dampers, we've got clearance between the tire and the fender well or fender liner all the way around. Got about, I'm going to say at its tightest point in the front, about 3/4 of an inch. Most of it is 3/4 of an inch, so that's pretty good. I mean, I wouldn't be doing any sharp turns with it, but you could get home in a pinch if you had to. And the rear, plenty, over an inch of room around the tire. So that's with the bags deflated. And now I will go and lift the car back up, or fill the bags, fill the system. I also installed bag pipe Andes compressor rebuild kit on the rear here. The compressor was getting a bit weak, but I'll lift it up and I'm going to reset the nominal height and see how high she goes.